Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Rama. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,
Hare Krishna.
Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna Krishna Hare
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Sri Bhat Prabhu, Dandat Pranams. You can unmute.
Yeah, Dandat Pranam. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay.
Hare Krishna devotees, welcome all of you for the today's morning program Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Today we are very fortunate to have His Grace Sri Bhagavat Prabhu, and Prabhu will enlighten us on Srimad Bhagavatam 4th Canto 19th chapter verses 5 to 8. Over to you, Prabhuji. You can start. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Firstly, I would like to thank the Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya team for giving me the opportunity to study and discuss these verses. So I would like to express the gratitude. And we'll start with brief Bhagavatam prayers, and then we'll begin discussing the verses. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayana Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashtaprayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttamaśloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopakumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. So before I begin, again I would like to seek the blessings of all the assembled Vaishnavas present here. We are discussing from 4th Canto, 19th chapter, verses 5, 6, 7, 8. So first we'll read the verses, purport, and translation and purport. So the 5th verse, yesterday we discussed till 4th verses. The 5th verse is Siddha Vidyadhara Daitya Danava Guhyakadayaha Sunandananda Pramukaha Parshada Pravara Hare. The Lord was accompanied by the residents of Siddhaloka and Vidyadhara Loka, all the descendants of Diti and the demons and the Yakshas. He was also accompanied by his chief associates headed by Sunanda and Nanda. Text 6. Kapilo Narado Datto Yogesha Sanakadayaha Tam Anviyur Bhagavata Yecha Tat Sevanot Sukaha. Great devotees who were always engaged in the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as well as the great sages named Kapila, Narada, and Dattatreya, and masters of mystic powers headed by Sanaka Kumara, all attended the great sacrifice with Lord Vishnu. Text 7. Yatra dharma dhugha bhumi sarva kama dhugha sati dhukti sma bhipsitan arthan yajamanasya bharata. My dear Vidura, in that great sacrifice, the entire land came to be like the milk-producing Kamadhenu. And thus, by the performance of Yagna, all daily necessities for life were supplied. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. In this verse, the word Dharma Dhugha is significant, for it indicates Kamadhenu. Kamadhenu is also known as Surabhi. Surabhi cows inhabit the spiritual world, and as stated in Brahma Samhita, Lord Krishna is engaged in tending these cows. Surabhir Abhipalayantam. One can milk a Surabhi cow as often as one likes, and the cow will deliver as much milk as one requires. Milk, of course, is necessary for the production of so many milk products, especially clarified butter, which is required for the performance of great sacrifices. Unless we are prepared to perform the described sacrifices, our supply of the necessities of life will be checked. Bhagavad Gita confirms that Lord Brahma created human society along with Yajna, the performance of sacrifice. Yajna means Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and sacrifice means working for the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this age, however, it is very difficult to find qualified Brahmanas who can perform sacrifices as prescribed in the Vedas. Therefore, it is recommended in Srimad Bhagavatam, Yajnai Sankirtana Prayehi, that by performing Sankirtan Yajna and by satisfying the Yajna Purusha Lord Chaitanya, one can derive all the results derived by great sacrifices in the past. King Pṛthu and others derived all the necessities of life from the earthly planet by performing great sacrifices. Now, this Sankirtana movement has already been started by the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. People should take advantage of this great sacrifice and join in the society's activities. And then there will be no scarcity. If Sankirtan Yajna is performed, there will be no difficulty, not even in industrial enterprises. Therefore, this system should be introduced in all spheres of life, social, political, industrial, commercial, etc. Then everything will run very peacefully and smoothly. We'll also read the text number 8 and the purport, and then we will have a discussion on these purports given by Srila Prabhupada. Uhu sarvarashanadya Shiradhari anna gorasan Taravo bhuri vashmanaha Prashuyanta madhuchyutaha. The flowing rivers supplied all kinds of taste, sweet, pungent, sour, etc. And very big trees supplied fruit and honey in abundance. The cows, having eaten sufficient green grass, supplied profuse quantities of milk, curd, clarified butter, and similar other necessities. If rivers are not polluted and are allowed to flow in their own way, or sometimes allowed to flood the land will become very fertile and able to produce all kinds of vegetables, trees, and plants. The word rasa means taste. Actually, all rasas are tastes within the earth. And as soon as seeds are sown in the ground, various trees sprout up to satisfy our different tastes. For instance, sugarcane provides its juices to satisfy our taste for sweetness, and oranges provide their juices to satisfy our taste for a mixture of the sour and the sweet. Similarly, there are pineapples and other fruits. At the same time, there are chilies to satisfy our taste for pungency. Although the earth's ground is the same, different tastes arise due to different kinds of seeds. As Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Bijamam Sarva Bhutana. I am the original seed of all existences. Therefore, all arrangements are there. And as stated in Ishopanishad, Purnamidam, complete arrangements for the production of all the necessities of life are made by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. People should therefore learn how to satisfy the Yajna Purusha, Lord Vishnu. Indeed, the living entity's prime business is to satisfy the Lord, because the living entity is part and parcel of the Lord. Thus, the whole system is so arranged that the living entity must do his duty as he is constitutionally made. Without doing so, all living entities must suffer. That is a law of nature. The words Taravo Bhuri Varshamanaha indicate very luxuriantly grown big body trees. The purpose of these trees was to produce honey and varieties of fruit. In other words, the forest also has its purpose in supplying honey, fruits, and flowers. Unfortunately, in Kali Yuga, due to an absence of yajna, there are many big trees in the forest, but they do not supply sufficient fruits and honey. Thus, everything is dependent on the performance of yajna. The best way to perform yajna in this age is to spread the Sankirtan movement all over the world. So, do Mangalachana prayers. Om Agnanatimirandasya Gnananjana Salakya Chakshurvilmilitam Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Tadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnava Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakhanvitam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Namini Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे अन्त्याकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। नमो महावदन्याय कृष्ण प्रेम प्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्ण चैतन्य नाम्ने गौरभूषे नमः। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कांता तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुस्तुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्ता। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे। Once again, welcome everyone to the Nityam Bhagavata Sevya. So we have started this chapter where King Pṛthu is performing his 100th sacrifice. And the theme of these verses that we will be discussing today is again around the performance of the yajna and how by the performance of yajna, the arrangement is made such a way that all the necessities of life are given automatically. Unfortunately, there is an absence of yajna in Kali Yuga, and hence we see so many distress and so much miseries. At the same time, Prabhupada is emphasizing wherever there is opportunity, the importance of Sankirtan Yajna. In fact, I was just going through some other verses in connection to this. So wherever there is a mention of Yajna or remotely connected to something related to sacrifice, Prabhupada never loses an opportunity to highlight and glorify Sankirtan Yajna just because it is the prime duty of this age. And also it's mentioned the prime duty of every living entity is to be in the constitutional position to serve the Lord. So Sankirtan Yajna is, that's why mentioned several times. So if you see the 5th and 6th verses, the verses are mentioning about naturally when the Supreme Lord appears, is the most important person is appearing there. Naturally, the other important subordinate persons are also following him. So considering they all are very much aware of the grandiose nature or the very significant nature of the event that's happening. So that's why the Supreme Lord is going there. So naturally, everyone accompanies the Supreme Lord. Not only that, they were also there to get his Supreme Lord's association. Like it's mentioned in the 6th verse, a very wonderful phrase is used. Tat sevonot utsukaha. So utsukaha means they're always eager. Sevanot, what are they eager for? The devotees, or the devotees are mentioned as sevanot utsukaha. So who are always eager to serve the Lord. So, and then not only that, they're eager to serve the Lord, and they're eager to go and bless Pṛthu Maharaj, who is doing his 100th sacrifice. So that's mentioned in the 5th and 6th verses. So the result, in a way, we can also understand that Pṛthu Maharaj was successful in his sacrifice, because the Supreme Lord is coming, and not only the Supreme Lord, various devotees, various great sages, everyone, the who's who, as we say, they're all coming to bless him in his endeavor on the completion of his most very arduous endeavor. I mean, very difficult endeavor, we can say. So in the 7th and 8th verses, the theme the theme that we have discussed many times, even in this past time, how by the performance of yajna, all daily necessities of life were supplied. So we can see the Ashtameda Yajna, the scale of the event is huge, and to perform that kind of a yajna, unimaginably large quantities of milk were needed. So that's why it is mentioned in the 7th verse that the whole land came to be like the milk producing Kamadhinu, and that's why the and then the earth itself became a cow and allowed huge quantities of milk to be milked, so that from milk so many other ingredients required for the yajna could be produced. So Prabhupada again mentions that unless we have sacrifice being performed in accordance with religious principles and to please Supreme Personality of Godhead or Supreme Lord Vishnu, when that is done, all the elements of material creation become very cooperative. So that's why the point around, unless we are prepared to perform the prescribed sacrifices, our supply of the necessities of life will be checked. So here, the key principle, as Bhagavatam repeatedly says, Samsiddhir Haritosha. So the yagna means Lord Vishnu, and one should work for the satisfaction of the Lord Vishnu. And to explain this, we have heard this analogy many a times, and Bhagavatam keeps it very simple. I mean, the principle itself is very simple, and the explanation of the principle is itself very simple. Like the example of watering the root of a tree or plant is given. Like if you want to water the individual, nourish the plant, we need to just water the root, and then it takes care of all the tree branches, the twigs, and the leaves, and so on. So once we water this, or rather, once everyone is the Supreme Personality of God, who is the root of this creation, everything and everyone will be automatically satisfied. So this key religious principles, the Bharo Dharma principle, is highlighted. That's why Bhagavatam is called Dharma Projita Kaitavaha. All other kinds of religious principles are kicked out. And to kick out, the emphasis has to be given in such a way that it gets rooted, and the root principle gets rooted into our hearts. That's why we see many a times its stories are a little bit different, characters are different, but the theme is the same. But unfortunately, such a simple principle is still not realized or not understood by people of Kali Yuga, because the social structure was so arranged that the principal or the head of the social system or the communities was well aware of this principle, with the simple one principle, and would engage the general masses of the community in to work towards the principle. So today we see that in any societies or any educational institutions or any educational technological institutions, there are so many principles by which they run. They say these are our key value principles. This is what we live by, abide by. But actually, those are just, in a sense, word jugglery and creating a complex and complicated mindset. The simple principle, Bhagavatam, so much of literature and Bhagavatam and everything seems to be seemingly endless literature, but just one principle to remember. At the end of the day. Samsiddhir Haritosha. So the point here is what the logic behind this principle is to understand who is the source of everything, where it is coming from, being grateful to that source, working according to that instructions, and finally understanding that source. So let's contrast with this present civilization. And see how this simple principle has been turned into such a complex and complicated matters or principles. So today we can see there are tremendous efforts and huge amounts of money are spent in meaningless activities. In one extent, today we are in the midst of the pandemic. That's why there are a lot of unnecessary expenditure has cut down. Like, for example, the Olympics right now going on. If it were not to be the pandemic, we knew so much of amount money would have been spent just for the inaugural ceremony itself. And that's one. If we take that as one extent, actually we are in the start of this new decade. Of course, this pandemic has come and taken a little bit sheen out of this so-called technological advancement. But what's worrying and what's frightening is this decade is going to mark, or rather, herald at this as these technological classes of men so emphatically claim that we are going to do space travel. The space tourism is going to be like the next big tourism. Like, if you would have heard, this month itself is quite a significant in the sense it's kind of accelerate, not decelerate, but accelerate the Earth's movement to the further misery. I mean, there were two people, billionaires, who just flew into the space. What for? They spent billions and billions of dollars. I mean, as Prabhupada says, it's duskriti, there's kriti, there's still a lot of intelligence involved, but just understand what that intelligence is being directed for. So they spent billions and billions of dollars and decades of research to kind of build spacecrafts that can just transport like people just like you and me to the edge of the outer space. And what they are doing, they spend so much of time and so much of gas is emitted, toxic gases are emitted, and they just go there. If you've seen the news, they just do some Maltese somersault. There's just for 1 or 2 minutes, and they just come down. Of course, the grander vision for these people is to how to occupy the space. Like when I first used to hear discourses in ISKCON, like mainly the Bhagavad Gita discourses, devotees used to say this joke like, in search of happiness, villages are coming to towns, town people are coming to cities, and people in cities like Indians are going to America for happiness, and people in America are going to space. So that time I had a hearty laugh. It looked like a joke, but actually it is in reality. So that's why basically the search for happiness is as if something is there. That's actually properly. And I could see that in the recent mega outreach, in all the 6 sessions, many of concepts, like I could see the questions and then people, the reactions, the slides. Many a times when some concepts around personality of Godhead, Bhagavan, things are spoken, people had their inhibitions, they kind of they had some doubts. But when we presented the 3rd session, I think, when we were elaborately discussing about the search for happiness, it hit people's where it has to hit. I mean, it just hit their hearts. They thoroughly were convinced, and in fact, that was what I felt in the 6 sessions. Thoroughly convinced them to this whatever we were trying to teach in terms of the 4 principles of Bhagavad Gita. That search for happiness, how human is searching for happiness and still not getting it, it just went into their head straight away without much effort. So further, so we were talking about this how the simple principle has been made into complex. And then, yeah, I mean, the result of all these activities, meaningless activities, we see in Pṛthu Maharaj's case, so much money and effort was put. The end result was personality of Godhead came there, and there was plenty of supplies, natural supplies, or we should say it was in abundance. But what is the result of these activities? So these activities, if you see, just taking the example of this space, and then because the satellite launching is a used thing. I mean, even ISRO kind of takes pride in the ability to launch about 108 satellites, or I think 100 plus satellites in one go. What is happening? All these satellites, all these space things the space materials are going and being put in the orbit. So once it's not like that, once they are used, they are put down. They're just lying, floating in that orbit, and they're creating so much of junk. It's said to be that one person I was attending a seminar, he was saying, just like how we have Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, we should have Swachh Antariksh Abhiyan. If you just understand and you see pictures, it's actually scary. The amount of junk that is debris that is flying around the Earth in the Earth's orbit close to the Earth, it's scary. And so it's scary in the sense that it's things that are so natural are being polluted in a process and very dangerous way. So that's why we understand that all the money and effort is being misdirected, and because they have to fund these activities, they come up with all kind of complex monetary generation activities with needless inventions, innovations, and in earlier times, trade was simple. There was a need for a product. People would procure money to develop certain product, or basically in this case do agriculture, and then or do some kind of a commodity building, like it could be something for house generation or things like that, and they would exchange, do a barter system. But in these times, like, because there is no trust, people have to borrow money, and because if they borrow money, the person who is lending, he doesn't have trust in the the person whom he is lending to. They come up with all kinds of crazy theories. Like I used to work on a project where there was a financial lending system. There were terms like RAROC and ROROC. Like it basically it looks like a simple formula. A formula was about to understand what is the risk involved in when I give some money to other. What is the risk involved whether I will get that money back or not? And from the other perspective, the person who is taking the money, they used to have calculations in terms of what is the risk involved if I invest certain money, whether I will get returns, good returns or not. So all these needless and complex systems have been put just because the human or the modern man had moved away from a simple principle that one should work for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. Naturally, all the necessities, all the happiness is provided. So then one can naturally understand it's basically the whole root lies in negating the supremacy of law, rejecting the law. Otherwise, it's not difficult to understand who will not kind of adopt this principle and live by this principle. So naturally, that's a root cause. We want in general, population want to be atheistic, remove God from the picture. Remove his plans and put their own plans and their own agenda. So naturally, all these consequences are there. Because we see that, again, coming back to this central point of when the yajna is done, what is the consequence? We not only hear elsewhere in Ramayana, and I think in Mahabharata also, I was reading this phrase, and in Bhagavatam also various places where this yajna and yajna performance of yajna is mentioned. Immediately they mention the prevailing conditions just to give a glimpse of what is the effect. Like they would say that the earth produced abundant crops, supported countless cows, and the cows had their udders full of milk, and that milk would drip and would fall on the earth. So this is what the situation are, the prevailing conditions when they were following the simple principles. So here, one other thing to mention also, Bhagavad Gita talks about this verse in Krishna 2.66. Nasti buddhir ayuktasya nacha yuktasya bhavana nacha bhavyatah shantir ashantasya kutasukam. So here, Prabhupada, so the point is, one who is not connected, but the translation is, one who is not connected with the Supreme in Krishna consciousness can have neither transcendental intelligence nor a steady mind, without which there is no possibility of peace. And how can there be any happiness without peace? So in the purport, Prabhupada mentions a simple way to understand this. He says, unless one understands that Bhoktaram Yajna, the Supreme Lord is the real enjoyer, is not the real only enjoyer and the only proprietor, the real proprietor and the real friend, true friend of ours, our mind cannot be pacified. So he mentions that if one is not in Krishna consciousness, there cannot be a final goal for the mind, and that's what we just discussed a little bit elaborately. Like unless one is atheistic and has this principle, the mind always looks for something else. Okay, I have to do something else. There is always a goal, searching for a goal, and due to that shifting goalposts, there is always disturbance in the mind. And once there is disturbance, there is no peace. If the mind is not steady, there is no peace. So without peace, how can we expect happiness? Is another simple. So all these simple principles are just so subtly and so properly connected to this core principle that Prabhupada is mentioning, the purpose and what we have been discussing for several weeks also. So here we can see in this purport, if we go again, I want to touch upon in the next few minutes about the Sankirtana Yajna. So how Sankirtana Yajna facilitates the above two in the sense, the above 2 points about the having a fixed goal for the mind and having complying with the principle, like the Yajna Purusha, like who is the Yajna Purusha? Samsiddhir Haritoshna. So Sankirtana Yajna is nothing but the chanting of the holy names of the Lord, coming together and chanting the holy names of the Lord. So naturally the mind is engaged. When the mind is engaged and everyone, as it says, Sankirtana, coming together. So that coming together in itself has a lot of deep meaning. Like when we come together, like we discussed this point about putting that pebble in the water. So when everyone put the pebbles in the same place, the circles don't clash, and in fact they become bigger. So that's why when everyone come together to please the Lord, to chant the names of the Lord, naturally there would be no much disturbances, and naturally everyone's mind will also be engaged. So, so let's just contemplate also to just understand the significance of this Sankirtan Yajna. Few verses from Bhagavatam itself, wherein I mean, there are many, but I just took few to just meditate in our discussion on the importance of Sankirtan Yajna. So, Bhagavatam 2.1.1 says, Etan nirvidyamananam ichchatam akuto bhayam yoginam nrupaninitam Hare Namanukirtan. So, where actual Sukadeva Goswami tells this in conversation to Parikshit Maharaj, he says, O king, the constant chanting of the holy name of the Lord is the doubtless and fearless way of success for all. And I was hearing this in the lecture that about how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in his instructions to Sanatana Goswami, he was talking about this 9 processes of devotional service, Shravanam, Smaranam, Vandanam, all this Kirtanam, all these 9 processes that we have. And there he says that Bhajanera Madhya Shrestha Navavidha Bhakti Krishna Prema Krishna Dithe Dhare Mahashakti. So here it's said that I just read this, I just took a copy of this, Krishna Prema, Krishna Prema. So all these, among the ways of executing devotional service, there are many ways. There are 64 links that we all know. The 9 prescribed methods are the best. For these processes have a great potency to deliver Krishna and ecstatic love for him. So out of these 9 processes, and then further, Mahaprabhu says that out of these 9 processes, Tara Madhya Sarva Shrestha Nama Sankirtana. Niraparadhe nama laye paya prema dhana. So of the 9 processes of devotional service, the most important is to always chant the holy name of the Lord. If one does so, avoiding the 10 kinds of offenses, one very easily obtains the most valuable love of Godhead. So Mahaprabhu, in fact, he is the one who started Sankirtan Yajna. In fact, Prabhupada interestingly says that Lord Chaitanya, that by performing Sankirtan Yajna and by satisfying the Yajna Purusha, so Lord Chaitanya is the Yajna Purusha for the Sankirtan Yajna. So he himself, so once we satisfy Lord Chaitanya, he himself is proclaiming, or rather declaring, what is the result of performing this Sankirtan Yajna. Of course, he uses a clause which is a big conditional clause for most of us, the nama without aparadha. So when we chant without offenses to the holy name, we get the benefits of all the sacrifices, the supermost benefit of all the sacrifices. Prabhupada, so naturally, Prabhupada, I was hearing one point on this. So Prabhupada used to say, I mean, it can happen anywhere these days. So he used to say that in Calcutta, if you go and distribute very perfect mangoes, the best mangoes freely, people will generally complain, why are you giving mangoes? Why are you giving it freely? You must have mixed some poison. So that is the condition of today's population in general, that when we give this Nama Sankirtan, people are not ready to take, because it is being distributed freely. The great wealth is being distributed freely, but we doubt, or we don't have the faith in this. So, and one more point I want to discuss before we move to the 8th verse, and I just want to discuss a few points there before we conclude. So actually here Prabhupada is interesting. I read multiple times to understand what Prabhupada meant here. So he said that we have started this ISKCON, so we are urging people to join ISKCON, so there will be no scarcity. So that point I understood. So then if Sankirtan Yajna is performed, there will be no difficulty, not even in industrial enterprises. So I was reading that just phrase multiple times, then this is my understanding. So what Prabhupada here is saying is, he's saying we are in a messed up situation, like we discussed about the space problem, but there are many other situations that we could continuously discuss, how we are currently in such a messed up condition. But there is a solution being offered, because if you see, suppose these are some techniques used, right? Like suppose there is a building and that it had been damaged or it had sunk so badly. So there are techniques to just lift the building and then put a new foundation, or just lift and shift, as they say. So actually, Prabhupada is saying that forget about this, because today, in general, all these modern intellectuals, they acknowledge we are in midst of a climatic problem, or this problem, that problem, there is this scarcity, that scarcity. So if you call all those intellectuals and ask for a solution, they will brainstorm and they'll come up with another solution, which will just shift the problem from one place to another place. But Prabhupada is giving this point here that this is like that lift and shift. It's like instead of trying to fix each and nut and bolt, this Sankirtan Yajna, whatever mess you have created, you go to space, you go to this, but you perform Sankirtan Yajna. That is enough. So I mean, he is just saying that this, and he's giving a solution to many conferences that are going on. That is what we need to kind of highlight, and then emphatically claim that this Sankirtan Yajna is a solution to all, and it's not just an emotional statement that we are making. So whatever situation the world is in today, if we just adopt this Sankirtan Yajna, it's like everything will be, all the problems will be vanquished. Now, we may have a doubt. Actually, I had this experience just 1.5 day back. My mobile suddenly was behaving badly. So I did a restart. Generally, whenever our laptops or mobiles have an issue, especially with software and hardware or anything, we do a restart. It seems systems typically get resolved. I mean, issues get resolved. If you still don't have that issue resolved, we do a forced restart. That eventually will solve the problem, or the factory reset, we call it. So if a human can do a restart, have a reset button for the systems, complex systems, so-called complex systems, actually the Supreme Lord Krishna also has a simple reset button. So if we look from the bottom up and we see, okay, what these problems are like, if we look at this, just Google and see, things seem so complex and also scary. But if you look from Krishna's perspective, it's just a factory reset. So, and the factory reset can be, because it ultimately it's a combination of various chemicals, materials. It can be easily disintegrated, right? It can be brought back to like condition zero easily. So we should have this faith that the Sankirtan Yajna is and truly the only way to solve the so-called complicated mess we are in. So it can really it's really that factory reset button that can actually, in spite of so many things, so many misdirected activities we as humans committing, still we can march towards the path of progress, or progress in the sense here, prosperity, that what Pṛthu Maharaj has got. I mean, it still can do that. It has the potential in doing, because Sankirtan Yajna is basically on the foundational principle, which we are discussing in detail for the last few minutes. So further going, so we'll talk about the 8th verse, a few points on the 8 verses, and then I just had some points to discuss on Ashwamedha Yajna and Sankirtan Yajna. So in 8th, it is talking about rivers and cows. Essentially, rivers and cows are the basis of human sustenance, which are provided abundance again. The core theme is rivers and cows are provided. I mean, they flow. They are provided in abundance, and there is a good performance of yajna. So I was just reading like how rivers can be helpful. I mean, actually, one point that I wanted to mention, like to emphasize that this Bhagavatam and Sankirtan Yajna, Prabhupada used to always say, like when I heard in earlier days, I was like not really convinced, but now I'm reading, I'm hearing Bhagavad Sevaya from various devotees' perspective on the Sankirtan Yajna. So Prabhupada used to say, suppose if there's something happens and the entire literature or human literature, whatever knowledge humans have developed till now gets washed away, gets lost, we will still not be at loss because we'll have Bhagavatam. And even suppose, let's Krishna forbid and not the right thing, but even let's say Srimad Bhagavatam also gets lost. Prabhupada says we'll still be not at loss if we have Chaitanya Charitamrita. So in one statement, Prabhupada is just outrightly rejecting all these material advances in material education that what is the use of this unless the principle, the core principle is missed. So keeping in view that core principle, this rivers, why the rivers and cows, just the significance of rivers we all know, and, and it was a little bit of a geographical revision for me, like to understand how rivers really benefit. And here it's important point Prabhupada is mentioning, it is rivers are not polluted and are allowed to flow in their own way, are sometimes allowed to flood the land. So we know how rivers generally, when they flow, they carry this silt. The silt is that gravel. I mean, it contains rich minerals that are coming from the mountains. So it contains all these sand particles, which actually, when it is allowed, when the rivers are allowed to flood the land, it deposits the silt on the land, and because it deposits this silt, the land actually absorbs the minerals. And also this silt promotes water and water retention in air circulation, so thereby making the land more fertile. So that's why, and nowadays we are kind of obstructing the flow by building big dams. Why are we building big dams? To generate much and more electricity, so that we could enjoy even continuously 24 hours a day, non-stop, 360, 24/7. So we are obstructing the flow of the rivers. We are polluting because the rainwater is getting polluted, and actually the rivers are polluted with industrial waste. So with so much of gaseous substance, we discuss how the things are floating in the space. So when the rainwater comes, it comes with all these chemicals, and it's flooding the rivers. And then not only that, we are adding it to that the industrial waste. So any industry generate tons and tons of amount of chemical waste. And today they are figuring out how to control the waste. They are coming up with solutions, IoT solutions, and then that again further increases another problem. So anyways, for that matter, in India, rivers are not only the source of lifeline, but are also for sources of spiritual emancipation. We know there are 7 holy rivers. All the rivers many rivers are holy, but 7 holy rivers are there: Gange, Yamuna, Godavari, Saraswati, Narmada, Sindhu, Kaveri, Jalesmin, Sanidham, Kuru. So we are generally instructed when we take bath, or anytime we do the purification or do some kind of activities for the Abhishek for Lord. Generally, that mantra is chanted so that all the holy rivers are present. Because holy rivers are holy. The rivers are holy because there is a deity personified. Like, these rivers are not just chemical combinations as scientists claim. Ganga, there's a goddess behind this river who's a personified, who's working on behalf of the instruction or the direction of Supreme Lord to purify, not just externally but internally also. Because we need pure water, will be purified, will be drinking pure water, and will be healthy. And at the same time, when we take a bath in these rivers, will be internally also purified. And unfortunately, forget about pure water. We are not even getting water. And then actually one point I wanted to mention, because we studied in our history like how in old civilizations used to prosper and basically used to develop along the banks of these rivers. Like we heard in India, in the civilization, and then in Nile civilization, Egypt, and that we read about so many civilizations. But today, the civilization, instead of prospering and progressing on these banks and tributaries, we want to progress on the path of outer ring roads or inner ring roads or regional roads or roads where there is last mile connectivity. Last mile connectivity is like, suppose I live in a remote place to have a nice farmhouse, but at least there should be some road that comes to my house so that I can go to the main road and get and from there to maybe a state highway and state highway to a national highway. So we want to be connected with the roads rather than the rivers. So that's why when the roads are stopped, like in lockdown, everything gets stopped. We suffer a lot. Everything comes to a standstill. So one more point, we are at 8. I'll take maybe 10 minutes to conclude. So here, Prabhupada is mentioning about the 6 kinds of rasas, how the taste. We know that all the taste in Bhagavad Gita also Krishna says, Rasoham apsu kaunteya. So I am the taste of the water. So essentially again, Prabhupada, here in the purport, we understand that the tastes are coming from the earth, and the earth is getting the taste because the water is getting deposited. And Krishna saying, I am the taste of this water. Again, the same principle that we discussed, like how we understand the principle, we'll understand everything. here. So moving further, I just want to mention in next 10 minutes, sorry for the extension, but an interesting analogy, I think, and Ashwamedha, we keep talking about Ashwamedha Yajna, at least for me, I was reading, it's there in Bhagavatam also, in first canto, 12th chapter, wherein Yudhishthira Maharaj, after Parikshit Maharaj was born, he was still lamenting that he had killed so many people. And not only that, generally this Ashwamedha Yajna is performed so that the performer is kind of proclaiming the superiority or the supremacy over the entire land. So that, Krishna encouraged Yudhishthira Maharaj to do Ashwamedha Yajna because he wanted him to be the emperor. So that when he is the emperor, he will rule according to religious principles, and all the subordinate kings will also comply with him, and there will be prosperity in general. So Krishna also wanted him to do this Ashwamedha Yajna, but at that time he was worried because all the wealth was depleted because of the war. So he was wondering how to get wealth. And to just tell you, for us to get a glimpse of the amount of wealth needed, it is said that he was advised by all the superiors in his Bhishma Dev, Vyasa Maharishi, and of course Krishna. They were advised to go towards north. So there was a king called Marutta who previously ruled before Yudhishthira, and he was like Yudhishthira, the emperor of the world. So he ruled according to religious principles and all. So once he did one yajna to Lord Shiva, and he was presented with a mountain of gold. A mountain. It is said that, I mean, the comparison is given to, like, it could be sometimes many times more than the Himalayan mountains. So he was presented with mountains of gold. So with those mountains of gold, he used to make the paraphernalia for the yajnas, like the the canopy for the sacrificial altar, utensils, and then the charity has to be given, right? The brahmanas have to be given, and many people were to be given charity. So everything was given in gold. So he possessed so much of gold and so much he giving charity that is still, like, whoever were given in charity, they couldn't take all of those, so they left behind. And all this, after the performance of this yajna, those things were just left behind like trash. So they were told that there is that treasury there, you go and collect that treasury. So Arjuna was asked to go and collect that treasury. So he goes, and it is described that he comes back. When he comes back and collects all that gold, all that wealth, the procession in which the wealth is brought back, it seemed like an endless procession of bullock carts, elephants, and so on, and horses. It looked like it was endless. And with all that wealth, Yudhishthira Maharaj could only do 3 horse sacrifices. So we can just understand what is the. It is now we can understand. At least for me, I was able to understand the humongous nature of this Ashwamedha. So now, just to understand this contrast with, because we have understood Sankirtana Yajna is so important, prime, and can deliver us or give us the results of all the yajnas. But I was just contemplating on this. So if we draw a comparison table between Ashwamedha Yajna and Sankirtana Yajna. So to do Ashwamedha Yajna, it is said that a qualified Brahmana is needed and wealth is needed. But to do Sankirtana Yajna, actually, no Brahmanas are needed, but in fact, it makes Shudras into Brahmana. For Ashwamedha Yajna, if a Brahmana makes a mistake, he will be disqualified and he could also be degraded. But Sankirtana Yajna works the opposite. However degraded we are, however disqualified we are, if we chant, we will be elevated. And for Ashwamedha Yajna, we just described how much wealth is needed. But for Sankirtana Yajna, no wealth is needed. In fact, we'll get Premadhana, like Prema, we discussed that verse, right? What is that verse in Antilila? Niraparade Nama Laye Paya Premadhana. So if we do Sankirtana Yajna, we'll get Premadhana. And naturally, in Ashwamedha Yajna also, if one does Ashwamedha, they'll get Lord's Association, because the performer only gets to see the Lord, and there is Lord's Lord is glorified. So in Sankirtana Yajna also, we see ultimately the Lord is glorified, and one can get the association of the Lord. How? Because it is Krishna Name Kali Kali Amanupi Krishna Avata. So the name, holy name, is non-different from the Lord itself. So whatever they are doing by spending so much of wealth and effort, they can just get the same benefit. Like Prabhupada, to understand in more detail what it means to get the same benefit. So a performer of Sankirtana Yajna is constantly in association with the Lord. So forget about the Brahmanas and the qualification. Even people, it is said in the glories of holy names, many glories are mentioned. If Ashwamedha Yajna has to be done, a Brahmana has to be in such a state that he has to have no sins in his account. I mean, he should not have performed, or he's like kind of sinless. But on the other hand, even a person is full of sins, even if he is jokingly or hesitatingly utter Krishna's name, he'll become qualified. So these are some of the analogies, or rather comparisons. Two more comparisons, and then we'll conclude. So here we see in this verse, King Pṛthu did, and then the earth is producing different kinds of rasa. So King Pṛthu has performed Ashwamedha Yajna, and the earth is producing different kinds of rasas. Whereas in Sankirtana Yajna, if you do the rasa is what we get. It's not this mundane rasa. The mundane rasa is we'll definitely get, but we'll get the transcendental rasa, Pibata Bhagavata Rasamayalam. So it is we'll get the treasure house of rasa. Basically, Nama Chintamani Krishna Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. So the name of the Lord is a touchstone. It's equal to a touchstone. The touchstone can turn everything into gold and can give us anything. So that is already there. But not only that, it is a Rasa Vigraha. It is a embodiment of Krishna's form, or it is Krishna himself, and there is an exchange. We are put on the platform of transcendental mellows of devotional service. We get transcendental rasa. And then finally, I would want to conclude the core principle in Ashwamedha Yajna is controlling the horse. Like they once they do the Ashwamedha, they will set one horse aside. I mean, they'll ask the horse to go and travel around. So whoever comes, whichever king comes across that horse, he is not ready to will accept the sovereignty, he has to challenge and control the horse. So in Bhagavad Gita, this analogy is given, like our body has these 5 horses. We also have these 5 horses, which are our senses. The sense of seeing, eyes, ears, touch, and all these 5 senses are compared to horses, and the ropes are compared to the mind, and the chariot driver, the intelligence and the soul. So in fact, even in Sankirtana Yajna, the controlling principle is to control this horses, the so-called horses, the various senses, and divert those senses in Hrishikesha Sevana. So again, that's why we can now emphatically and very clearly say that how Sankirtana Yajna is much more superior than the other forms of Yajna, and in fact gives us much more benefit. And finally, by doing Ashwamedha Yajna, we may not be able to get another Ashwamedha Yajna. We have to again do the same thing. But by doing Sankirtana Yajna, we receive now. By giving Sankirtana Yajna, we receive more happiness. Because in Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about this chanting is both the sadhana and the sadhya. Is both the objective. I mean, both the means and also the goal. So with these points, I would like to conclude that how the core principle of Sansiddhir Haritoshanam, when it is missed, our lives will become complex and complicated. And then by understanding that Sankirtana Yajna encompasses or has all the principles embedded in it, and it is the best. Not just in Kali Yuga. If we see, yes, Kali Yuga, Prabhupada mentions, he highlights that in Kali Yuga, this is the best form of Yajna. But if we see this comparison, in any Yuga, this is the best form of Yajna. So that's why we should, in our efforts in preaching, we should be able to also emphasize this point in addition to the philosophical points of you're not the body, you're not the soul, but this principle of the keep in his religious, the Parodharma principle of how the Supreme Lord is the source and how satisfying him one can be happy. So then naturally all other things will fall in place. So with this, I will conclude. Sorry for going some minutes extra. And anyone wants to share any points or correct or have any questions, please.
Thanks a lot, Prabhuji, for the wonderful class, and you have nicely mentioned how olden days used to be and how it is now, and how difficult life became. So as part of that, you have mentioned that one has to do the important. You have highlighted the importance of doing the prescribed duties and yajna sacrifices, and you have mentioned that even though Bhagavatam has different characters and different activities performed, but the main theme is Samsiddhir Haritoshanam. And you have mentioned that how we are leading the complex life now, but for all these things, the only solution is Sankirtana Yajna. And you have mentioned that like olden days it is, prosperity used to be along the rivers, but now it is along the ring roads, highways, and all those things. And you have mentioned the comparison between the Aswamedha Yajna and the Sankirtana Yajna. It was wonderful. And whereas Sankirtana Yajna gives the transcendental rasa. And at the end, you have mentioned that sadhana is the only means and the goal. It is both. Thanks a lot, Prabhuji, for highlighting Sankirtana Yajna and the importance of leading the simple life. Thanks once again. And the devotees lines are unmuted. Devotees can unmute and ask any questions. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. What is the difference between Ashwamedha Yaga and Rajasuya Yaga?
Actually, I was also thinking, I was reading that Mahabharata. I have the Mahabharata book from Krishna Dharma Prabhu. So Rajasuya Yajna also, there was very similar. So it was, I think it's just maybe the technical differences. I was also read that, I was reading yesterday night also, whatever time I could get. But it had very similar things. I mean, it was the reason that time Krishna asked Yudhishthira to do Rajasuya Yajna was to establish the supremacy, his supremacy. And there was also a horse mentioned where it was let go. I think not sure about the horse, but the goal was same. But yeah, even I was also trying to get, but in the limited time I couldn't. At least the Ashwamedha Yajna, which comes in the later part towards the end of the war. I mean, after the war is over, that's when the horse is asked to, let go. Then Arjuna wins, and he has also several fights also. So those things are mentioned. But for Rajasuya Yajna, it was not mentioned. Maybe I think that could be the reason, or maybe I have to read again. I'll get back to you on that. Even I had the same question.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat Pranam, Sri Bhagavat Prabhu. Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Thank you for reminding the glories of Sankirtana Yajna and how we should be engaged in Sankirtana Yajna and propagating the glories of Sankirtana Yajna. Thank you, Prabhuji. One question, Prabhuji. Yes. Despite all the glories, still, why, even those who are in the cultured family in our country, still they, perform all other type of yajna other than Sankirtana Yajna. Like, they type of fire sacrifice.
Yeah, that's there. So two ways to understand. I think it's just the one is basically the spirit behind the ritual is missed in these parampara system, the traditions that have been passed on from one generation to another generation. What I could, in simple words, I could immediately recollect and say is the spirit behind these rituals is missed. So generally we are stuck into these rituals. Because the spirit, as even Ashwamedha Yajna, we could also see. In the Pṛthu Maharaj case also we have read the spirit is to satisfy the Supreme Lord. So naturally, when that spirit is missed, it becomes difficult for anyone to accept other types of yajna or like to kind of come to this conclusion that one should take up to Sankirtana Yajna. Because and when the spirit is missed, anything is done for self gratification or self-sense gratification rather than the gratification or rather than the pleasure of the Supreme Lord. So I think my understanding is missing the spirit and also forgetting for whose pleasure we should work for is the reason that people are still engaged in other yajnas rather than Sankirtan.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Yeah. Thank you for the explanation.
I think there are no more questions, Prabhuji, so we can end the class with the Vaishnava Pranama.
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you again for giving this opportunity. Mancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyaeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah. अनंत कोटि वैष्णव भक्तवृंद की जय, प्रभुपाद की जय, श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय. हरे कृष्णा. We'll meet tomorrow.
Very much. Hari Hari.
Hare. Thanks again, Prabhuji, for the wonderful